It's time now for the press review once again with Erin Agunke, who joins me on set. Erin, we've been talking about it a lot the whole morning. 3 months since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What do the papers have to say today?
Well, Le Monde, the French paper, Haxi, dedicated it to their cover page this morning. The lessons of 3 months of war. Now, these are essentially takeaways that Western military experts have observed. There are 10 of them, so I'll just pick a couple. First, despite the asymmetry between Russian and Ukrainian armies, the Russian army being significantly larger than the Ukrainian one, the Ukrainian military has still performed far better than expected, in part thanks to the quick mobilization of its reserve forces and also thousands of foreign volunteers. The paper also says that Ukraine's tight-lipped communication on its own losses has likely boosted morale. The French military, though, suspects that as many Ukrainian soldiers as Russian soldiers have perished. They estimate that some 15,000 Ukrainians may have lost their lives, soldiers. An editorial in the Belgian paper Le Soir, meanwhile, argues that everyone would like to believe that there are signs of defeat for Russia, even a collapse of Vladimir Putin's regime, but instead, 3 months on, there's no reason to believe that his government is going anywhere. And also, though the Russian military surely hasn't obtained the victories that it may have expected, it is still annihilating cities and towns across Ukraine with no end in sight.
But of course, that doesn't mean that Russia is necessarily winning.
Yeah, Haxi, the independent paper, the Moscow Times in English, did focus on Russia's losses. Now, it says that infantry reserves have been depleted. It says that the Russian military falls far short of the 3-to-1 attackers to defenders ratio that most military doctrine says is necessary in order for an attacking force to be successful. In response, the Kremlin has apparently opened up additional recruitment points across the country. It's offered Russians relatively large sums for short-term contracts, as much as 4 times the average local salary, nearly $3,000 US dollars a month. Some analysts also say that Russia is pulling forces from other countries, several countries in Africa, from Syria, in Georgian republics, and is also increasingly reliant on conscripts. I also looked at an interesting op-ed piece in the Financial Times, Haxi, that argued that Russia's lies are weakening its trial of strength with the West. It says that Russia has tried to frame Western countries as essentially an hypocritical empire of lies. It's railed against the United States and its allies in places like Iraq, Libya, and beyond. Now, while the editorialist acknowledges that the West is specialized in, quote, proclaiming an ideal or policy and applying it inconsistently, he says that's not the same as what Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin do with outright lies, saying that Russia hasn't invaded Ukraine, that Russia didn't poison Alexei Navalny. It says this isn't just a matter of frivolous semantics, but that it matters because in empires of hypocrisy, like in the West, as he says, open debate and criticism are possible. You can make mistakes, you can commit crimes, but they're pointed out either in the press or by official inquiries, and that this is impossible in Russia and ultimately means that its kind of a liberal model and its war is less sustainable.
Erin, today you're also looking at press coverage of US President Joe Biden's comments on Taiwan on Monday. And he has, I think it's fair to say, received a lot of criticism for those comments.
Yeah, especially from China. As you can imagine, Joe Biden saying that the U.S. would intervene militarily if the Chinese mainland takes the island of Taiwan by force. The Chinese paper, the Global Times in English, says that the Biden administration is taking a step to further hollow out the one China policy and to break with the strategic ambiguity that's defined its politics on that for decades. It sought to appease both sides. The paper says that China will take firm action against this shift. Many American papers this morning were critical as well. The Wall Street Journal, for example, saying that the White House kind of quickly moved to clarify Joe Biden's remarks. And he concludes that the problem now is that no one is really sure exactly what U.S. policy is, that these constant reversals, the president making off-the-cuff remarks and the White House moving to try and clarify or even reverse them, undermines his credibility both with his allies and his adversaries. A Bloomberg editorial, Haxi, however, argued that these comments were actually a smart deterrence strategy. It says that indeed, after decades of that strategic ambiguity, the U.S. needed to be clear about precisely what it would do if China were to act. He says that this is the 3rd time that Biden has said the U.S. would defend Taiwan, and that he's concluding that this is probably a very deliberate effort to strengthen deterrence without including the cost of formally changing America's stance. And he says this strategy has its merits.
Okay, well, staying with some American papers, a story about sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Church, capturing the attention of a lot of papers today. What exactly did that investigation reveal?
Well, it's a scathing 300-page report, Haxine. It's worth mentioning that with 14 million members, this is the largest denomination in the United States. So it reveals that top leaders, according to the Washington Post, top leaders tried to hide sexual abuse claims. They lied about them. They did not heed incessant warnings. They put concern over litigation, over people's safety. The paper also reveals that a former president of the denomination was considered was credibly accused of sexual assault. The Atlantic, Haxie, wonders how many bad apples we'll have to pluck before recognizing that the orchard has deceased. In addition to describing this report as a calamity, a catastrophe, they say that American evangelicalism is broken at a fundamental level. It really needs a reckoning in the way we've seen with the Catholic Church and all of its sex abuse scandals.
Okay, Erin, well, you're finishing today with democratic processes among birds.
That's right. Actually, Le Parisien says that if you're annoyed by hearing incessant cawing in the morning, you may actually be hearing the sounds of a referendum. That's because some species of crows apparently try to reach consensus before at nighttime flying from the treetops that they spend the day in to wherever they're going to spend the night. Now, this is based on a University of Exeter study, which found after 130 hours of audio of cawing, that the intensity of those sounds corresponded to the massive departures, and that when that cawing wasn't very intense, there were fewer departures, suggesting that no consensus was made. Now, this is different to other kind of consensus-based species like bees or ants, because they're all from the same family, whereas these birds are individuals. And that means, as Le Parisien points out, that sometimes there can be conflicting interests. So maybe we'll, as humans, will have to take a listen to the cawing of crows and see how we can better address conflicting interests and better move together.
Yeah, isn't cawing just the way democracy works in families anyway?
Yeah, of families of birds in particular.
Erin Ogunke with today's press review. Thank you very much.